Welcome to Tracking Corner. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Why Nations Fail by Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson. We got some really fascinating excerpts from this one.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to kind of dig into this.
Me too.
Basically, this book tackles the age-old question. Why do some nations thrive while others just totally struggle? It's a big one.
Yeah, it is.
Luckily, we have our amazing expert here to help us unpack all these complex ideas and, help everyone really understand these core arguments.
So the book is challenging some pretty common assumptions, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like the idea that geography or even culture are the main reasons why some nations succeed and others don't.
Absolutely. The authors really take those conventional theories head on. They argue that those explanations just don't hold up when you actually look at the evidence. So they use this really interesting example of Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales.
Why Nogales? What's so special about that?
Well, these are two cities that are literally split by the U.S.-Mexico border.
Oh, wow.
So think about it. Same geographic location. Same cultural heritage.
Same background.
Same background. You even have families.
Oh, wow.
That are split across the border. But there's a huge GE difference in living standards, in economic opportunities.
Interesting.
Like the authors actually point out, the average income in Nogales, Arizona is way higher than in Nogales, Sonora.
So they're saying that geography and culture aren't the deciding factors?
Not the deciding factors.
Then what is?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
The author's answer is institutions. Institutions. They say the real difference between nations lies in the institutions that they create.
What do they mean by institutions, though?
So think of institutions as like the rules of the game.
Oh, okay.
The incentives that shape how people behave and interact within a society.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, perfect.
And they differentiate between two main types, right?
Yes.
Inclusive and extractive.
You got it.
Okay, so tell me more about those.
Okay, so inclusive institutions, the way they describe them, are those that create a level playing field. They encourage participation.
Okay.
They protect property rights.
Gotcha.
And they basically allow individuals to pursue opportunities based on merit rather than like connections or privilege.
So everyone has a fair shot.
Everyone has a fair shot.
Yep.
Based on their efforts and their abilities.
I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And the authors argue that these inclusive institutions, they're essential for fostering innovation, economic growth, and just overall prosperity.
So are they saying that inclusive institutions are the key?
They're the key. And to kind of show this,
they use examples like the development of democratic institutions in England.
Oh, interesting.
And then obviously the rise of the United States as evidence of that connection.
Okay, what about those nations that don't develop these institutions?
That's where extractive institutions come in.
Extractive institutions?
Yeah, so they describe these as systems where a very small elite holds power. And they basically design the rules to benefit themselves.
Oh, so they rig the system.
They rig the system, extracting wealth from the rest of society.
At the expense of everyone else. Wow.
And they argue that these extractive institutions create a really vicious cycle. They stifle innovation. They limit opportunities for the majority of people. And then that just perpetuates inequality and poverty.
Wow. So it's like a downward spiral.
It is like a downward spiral.
Yeah.
And to show this, they give some historical examples. Like the Spanish conquest of Latin America. And the Kingdom of Congo in Africa. And that just shows how these extractive institutions can hinder a nation's progress for generations.
Those are some pretty heavy examples. But are there ever any cases where nations with extractive institutions
that's a good question.
Still manage to grow?
So the authors actually do acknowledge that growth can occur under extractive institutions. At least for a little while. They cite examples like the Soviet Union and even present-day China.
Oh, interesting.
Which have both seen periods of significant economic expansion.
But doesn't last.
They caution that without those essential elements of inclusivity, like secure property rights, a level playing field, opportunities for everyone to participate. This growth tends to be short-lived.
Oh, so it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. They compare it to building a house on a shaky foundation.
Oh, I see.
You know, it might look impressive at first, but it's ultimately vulnerable to collapse.
So you're saying that this idea of institutions being the foundation is super important.
It's key. It's the foundation.
Can you give me an example from the book that illustrates how these different types of institutions lead to such vastly different outcomes?
They contrast the development of North America by the English with the Spanish colonization of South America. They argue that the English colonists, facing different circumstances, different constraints, ended up fostering more inclusive institutions in North America, particularly in what would become the United States.
So let's break that down. What were the key differences in how the English and Spanish approached colonization?
So the Spanish, arriving in regions with really dense indigenous populations and tons of resources like gold and silver. They basically opted for a strategy of extraction. They imposed this hierarchical system that concentrated power and wealth in the hands of a small elite. They established institutions like the encomienda system.
Encomienda.
Which essentially granted Spanish colonists control over indigenous labor. Forcing them to work in mines or on plantations.
So it was designed to exploit existing resources and extract wealth without much regard for the well-being of the majority.
Sadly, yes.
Wow.
And the authors argue that this set a precedent for extractive institutions that would just continue to shape Latin America for centuries, contributing to persistent inequality and hindering long-term economic development.
So how did the English approach differ?
So the English colonists, they faced a very different landscape in North America. They weren't encountering these vast, easily exploitable empires. The resources were different. The economic opportunities were different. It demanded a different approach.
So they couldn't just extract.
They couldn't just extract.
They had to build something.
They needed to attract settlers and cultivate the land. And that required a more decentralized, participatory system.
Interesting.
So rather than just extracting wealth from an existing population.
They had to create conditions.
They had to create the condition.
For a new society to thrive.
Exactly. And that, according to the authors, led to the development of institutions that, while not perfect, were more inclusive than those established in Spanish America.
Can you give me a specific example of an institution that shows this difference?
A great example is the Virginia Company's headright system.
The headright system.
So this system, established in 1618, granted land to colonists who paid their own passage or brought indentured servants to Virginia. It was a way to attract settlers and incentivize them to contribute to the colony's growth.
So it gave them a stake in the colony's success.
Exactly. A stake in the success.
And that was more inclusive.
And this, the authors argue, laid the groundwork for a more egalitarian society. Compared to the rigid social hierarchies of Europe.
Interesting. At the time. So those early choices made by the English colonists, driven by their specific circumstances, had ripple effects that shaped North America.
Absolutely. Why Nations Fail emphasizes how those seemingly small decisions about institutions can have huge implications for a nation's trajectory. Setting it on a path toward prosperity or failure.
It's like those moments in those choose-your-own-adventure books where one decision sends you down a different path. So once those inclusive institutions are in place...
That's a great question.
Is a nation's success guaranteed?
That's a great question, and one that we'll explore further in our next segment. But the authors argue that even those societies that manage to establish these inclusive institutions are not immune to the dangers of backsliding.
Backsliding. What do they mean by that?
So they mean that there's always this risk of these inclusive institutions being eroded or undermined, even in societies that seem to have a strong foundation of inclusive principles.
I see.
It's like this constant tug of war between the forces that are pushing for greater inclusion and those that are seeking to concentrate power and wealth.
So even in a nation like the U.S.,
exactly,
with its history of democratic institutions,
right,
there's potential for those institutions to be weakened.
100%.
Wow.
That's what the authors caution.
Okay.
And they use historical examples to illustrate this.
Okay.
How even stable and prosperous societies can fall prey to those forces, seeking to extract wealth and maintain their grip on power.
This is getting really interesting.
I know, right?
I'm really eager to hear about these examples of backsliding.
And what we can learn from them.
Okay, so in our next segment, we're going to delve deeper into those historical cases of backsliding.
Okay.
And explore what Why Nations Fail tells us about the challenges and opportunities facing nations today.
I'm ready.
All right, so stay tuned.
Can't wait. Welcome back to our deep dive into Why Nations Fail.
I'm so glad you're back.
I'm ready to jump into those historical examples of backsliding you mentioned.
You are in for a treat. One of the cases that the authors examine is Venice.
Venice. Interesting.
You might think of Venice as this romantic, prosperous city-state.
Right, yeah, like canals.
Miles, merchants. But they argue that Venice's decline was a direct result of its inclusive institutions.
Oh, wow.
Becoming more extractive over time.
Venice, the city of canals and merchants.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Though during its heyday, Venice was known for its relatively inclusive institutions. You know, merchants had a voice in government.
Right. Property rights were protected.
Okay.
There was a sense of shared prosperity. But, as the authors point out, that started to change as a small group of elite families consolidated their power.
So they wanted to protect their own interests.
Exactly.
Even if it meant stifling the very thing that made Venice successful.
Yes. They started implementing policies that restricted competition, limited access to trade routes, and essentially closed the ranks.
Oh, wow.
Excluding newcomers and stifling innovation.
So it's a classic example of how the allure of power can corrupt even the most inclusive system.
It's a cautionary tale, for sure. It shows that no society, no matter how prosperous or seemingly stable, is immune to the dangers of backsliding.
It takes constant work.
It does. Constant vigilance and a commitment to upholding those principles of fairness and open access that underpin inclusive institutions.
Okay, so Venice shows us how even successful societies can slip back into these extractive patterns. What other historical examples do they use?
So they also discuss the case of the Roman Republic.
Oh, interesting.
Which transformed into the Roman Empire.
Right.
So initially, Rome had institutions that encouraged participation, competition, a degree of power sharing.
Right.
But as Rome expanded, its territory and wealth, a powerful elite emerged.
And this elite gradually chipped away at those institutions.
That's exactly right.
Concentrating power and wealth in their own hands.
And the authors argue that this shift towards extractive institutions ultimately undermined Rome's long-term stability.
Wow.
And paved the way for its eventual decline.
And what factors did they point to?
They point to things like the erosion of property rights, the concentration of land ownership in the hands of just a few, and the rise of political corruption.
Makes sense.
As key factors in this process.
So these examples really drive home the point that institutions, they aren't static.
They're not.
They're always evolving.
Always evolving.
And there's this tension between forces for inclusion and those seeking to extract wealth and maintain control.
It's that tug of war we talked about.
Yeah.
It's constant.
Right. And Why Nations Fail argues that. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for understanding why some nations prosper.
It's all about the institutions.
Right.
But let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And look at some more contemporary examples.
Okay.
The authors highlight Botswana as a success story.
Botswana. What makes him stand out?
Okay. So Botswana inherited extractive institutions from British colonial rule.
Okay.
But after gaining independence in 1966,
Yeah.
they embarked on a pretty remarkable journey of transformation.
What did they do?
So the leadership made a conscious decision to invest in their people, build inclusive institutions, and create a more equitable society.
What were some of the key decisions?
So first, they recognized the importance of property rights.
Oh, interesting.
Ensuring that people could own land and benefit from their labor.
Okay.
Second, they invested heavily in education.
Education, okay.
Recognizing that an educated population is essential for growth and development.
And they used revenue from their diamond mines to fund these investments.
Yes. Botswana is rich in diamonds.
Right.
And the government made the crucial decision to use that wealth for the benefit of all citizens.
Wow. That's amazing.
Not just a select few.
Yeah.
They avoided that resource curse.
The resource curse.
Right? That plagues so many resource-rich countries.
Right. Where it just leads to corruption.
Exactly. Where wealth often leads to corruption.
Okay.
And entrenches those extractive institutions even further.
So they used their wealth to break free
Yes.
from that cycle of extraction.
They did. They broke free.
Wow.
And the results speak for themselves.
Yeah. What are the results?
Botswana has experienced decades of sustained economic growth.
Wow. Yeah.
They have a relatively stable democracy.
That's great.
And they boast one of the highest standards of living.
That's amazing.
In Africa.
That's a really inspiring story.
It is. It's a shining example of how nations can overcome that legacy of extractive institutions and create a more prosperous future.
I'd love to hear about Zimbabwe as well.
Okay, Zimbabwe.
Which you mentioned earlier,
Yes.
a country that's faced tremendous challenges.
It has.
How do the authors explain that decline?
So Zimbabwe was once known as the breadbasket of Africa.
Oh, wow. Really?
With a thriving agricultural sector, a relatively prosperous economy. But in recent decades, it's experienced this tragic decline.
Yeah.
Marked by hyperinflation, economic collapse,
Yeah.
and widespread poverty.
A stark contrast to Botswana.
It is. So what went wrong?
Yeah, what happened?
The authors argue that Zimbabwe's downfall is a direct consequence of extractive institutions.
Oh, interesting.
They point out that the colonial legacy of white minority rule created a very unequal society.
Right.
Where land and resources were concentrated in the hands of a few, disenfranchising the black majority.
So those extractive institutions were already there.
They were baked in.
Baked into the system.
To the structure of society.
And then what happened after independence?
Tragically, after independence, instead of dismantling those extractive systems, Robert Mugabe and his regime essentially perpetuated them.
Oh, wow.
They used their power to enrich themselves and their cronies.
Wow.
Seizing land from white farmers.
Whoa, okay.
Redistributing it to loyalists, often with disastrous consequences for agricultural production.
So they made things worse.
They undermined property rights, stifled dissent.
Wow.
Created a climate of fear that drove away investment and skilled workers.
So instead of breaking free, they doubled down on extraction.
They doubled down. And Zimbabwe stands as this reminder of how those extractive forces, if left unchecked, can just destroy economies.
Wow.
Erode social cohesion.
Yeah.
And perpetuate poverty and instability.
So Botswana and Zimbabwe really highlight the message of why nations fail.
They do.
It's not about geography or culture or even natural resources. It's about the institutions.
It is.
And the choices we make.
The choices we make as societies, why nations fail, compels us to recognize the impact of institutions on a nation's trajectory and to understand those forces that shape them.
Right.
It's a call to action.
Okay.
To fight for systems that empower people. Protect their rights. And create opportunities for all to thrive.
So we've seen these historical examples of backsliding, like Venice and Rome.
Yes.
And we've seen how these dynamics play out in modern cases.
Yes.
Like Botswana and Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Are there any other insights from why nations fail?
That's a great question.
Are there any universal solutions?
Yeah, that's what we're going to explore in our final segment. We'll delve into what the authors suggest are the keys to breaking free from those vicious cycles of extraction and fostering lasting prosperity, so stay tuned.
Can't wait. Welcome back to our final segment on why nations fail. I'm really curious to hear what the authors suggest are the keys to breaking free from those cycles of extraction.
Yeah, the big question, right?
Yeah, like how do we achieve lasting prosperity? Do they offer any solutions?
Well, if you're looking for like a simple one-size-fits-all formula, you're going to be a little disappointed.
No magic bullet.
No magic bullet. The authors really emphasize that there's no magic bullet. Creating and sustaining these inclusive institutions is a super complex process. And it requires a deep understanding of the context. You know, the historical, social, economic context.
Of each nation.
So
no easy answers then?
Not exactly. While they don't offer a prescriptive roadmap, they do highlight some key factors that has contributed to successful transitions
I'm listening.
towards inclusive institutions.
What are some of those factors?
One crucial element they emphasize is what they call critical junctures.
Critical junctures?
Critical junctures. These are like moments of upheaval or crisis where the existing power structures are kind of weakened or disrupted. And that creates an opportunity for change.
Oh, so it's like a window of opportunity.
It is. Like a window of opportunity opens up. And it allows for new ideas and reforms.
So can you give me an example of a critical juncture that led to positive change?
They point to the Black Death in Europe.
A Black Death?
In the 14th century.
Wow.
As a prime example.
Okay.
So this plague, you know, wiped out a huge chunk of the population, leading to labor shortages.
Yeah.
And a shift in power dynamics between landowners and peasants.
So a tragedy like the Black Death actually created conditions for more equality.
That's what they argue. In the aftermath, peasants were able to demand better wages, better working conditions, which led to the erosion of feudalism.
Wow.
And it paved the way for more inclusive systems.
In parts of Europe.
Yeah, in parts of Europe.
So these moments of crisis can be catalysts for change.
They can. And Why Nations Fail suggest that recognizing these critical junctures and seizing those opportunities to push for reforms is essential.
But seizing those opportunities requires more than just luck.
Absolutely.
You need good leadership.
You need leadership that is committed to creating a more inclusive society. And they're willing to challenge that status quo. They give the example of the Meiji Restoration in Japan.
The Meiji Restoration.
Where reformers overthrew the feudal shogunate. And implemented all these modernizing reforms that transformed Japan into a major economic power.
So leadership, that's not just focused on self-enrichment, but on empowering everyone.
Exactly. Leaders who recognize that a more inclusive society benefits everyone in the long run.
Not just a few.
Not just the elite. And they also emphasize that it's not just about top-down leadership. It's also about empowering citizens.
Oh, interesting.
To participate in the political process. To hold their leaders accountable. And to demand a more just and equitable system.
So it's about creating a culture of active citizenship.
Active citizenship. Where people are invested in protecting those institutions.
The institutions that guarantee their rights.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that these inclusive institutions are not self-sustaining. They require constant vigilance. And a commitment from everyone. To uphold those principles.
Of fairness and accountability.
Yes. Fairness, accountability, open access.
That's what it takes.
That's what underpins a thriving society.
So creating lasting prosperity, it's not a destination.
It's not.
It's a journey.
It's a journey. You said it perfectly.
It's about constantly striving for a better society.
Yes. Why Nations Fail doesn't offer easy answers. But it gives us this framework for understanding how these complex dynamics of development work and the importance of creating those institutions that empower people and unleash their potential.
It's been a fascinating journey.
Well, yes.
Exploring these ideas.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a much deeper understanding now.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Of what shapes the fate of nations.
I highly recommend checking out Why Nations Fail for yourself.
I think I will.
You won't be disappointed. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe to Tracking Corner.
Of course.
For more explorations of the books and ideas
that
are shaping our world.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.